In today's episode of Today in World War II, March 3rd, the Soviets react very harshly after their peace ultimatum was rejected by Finland. Stalin approves the execution of captured Polish officers and landowners. The Japanese attack a northern Australian town pretty brutally. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea happens. It's a very interesting battle I'll get into in more detail. On this date, and the number of British civilian casualties actually exceeded the British military casualties. And finally, the U.S. and Filipino troops capture the capital of the Philippines, Manila. Let's get started. Okay, on March 3rd, 1940, a couple of days after Finland rejected the very harsh peace terms that were offered by the Soviet Union, the Soviets decided they wanted a little payback. So they launched another major offensive against the Finns. They had been establishing a beachhead west of Viipuri, which is the provincial capital of the Karelian Isthmus. They were using the frozen Gulf the Bay of Viipuri to do this to outflank the Finns. So it was getting really touch and go for the Finns now. But the Finns fought hard. I mean, they fought. I mean, imagine if you were Americans and they were coming after, let's say, I don't know, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia or something, or Pittsburgh, I bet you'd fight pretty hard too as well. So they were fighting for their lives, for their freedom, for their wives and their children, their parents, and so on and so forth. So it was pretty brutal fighting. It always had been, but now it got desperate for the Finns. And I don't want it to become desperate for you. And unfortunately, I don't make the rules here, but it will become desperate in your soul if you don't subscribe to my channel. Well, okay, maybe I'm taking that a little bit too far, but I would like for you to subscribe to my channel. Let's put it that way. How about that? No, no blame, no judgment on my part. Because if you do, the more subscribers I have, the more YouTube will take my channel seriously and help it grow. Okay? I appreciate it. On March 3rd, 1940, Adolf Hitler, well, a couple of days ago, he decided he was going to go ahead and invade Norway and Denmark. Now he decided that, you know what, he's not going to, he wasn't going to do it simultaneously when he invades Belgium, Holland, and France. He was going to do it before. Okay. So if you consider that the actual invasion of Western Europe started at the end of April. He didn't have much time to launch a major invasion like he was going to do. There was a lot of naval components to get into Norway. Look, Denmark was a walk in the park. There's no way in the world the Danes could do anything except offer token resistance. So Norway was the prize, and that was going to be the one that was be the most difficult. And it's going to be a fascinating thing to follow as we get into this, in this chronicle here, this series. But yeah, he decided that he was going to invade before, so the action was going to start taking place very, very soon. Uh, Unfortunately, the action takes place every time one of my viewers watches my video because at that point in time they have a choice. Do I click thumbs up or do I ignore it? Well, I want you to click thumbs up, but I want you to go the extra mile. Because if you go the extra mile and leave a comment, then that is like drawing a straight, or a royal flush in poker, because that's the big time money, because that's what YouTube wants to see. So if you do that, you're going to help my channel grow. Thank you. Very shameful day in Soviet history, and boy, there's a lot of shame there with the murders and imprisonments that they did in their entire existence as a country. Today, on March 30th, 1940, in a session of the Soviet Politburo, Stalin and five other Politburo members officially approved the execution of the captured Polish officers and landowners, and this was a consequence of the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement, the non-aggression pact signed between the Soviets and Nazi Germany. And we know there was secret codicils there. We know that, for all intents and purposes, Hitler gave the Soviets a green light to do what they wanted to do in the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland. Okay, Finland. I mean, the Germans pretty much stabbed Finland in the back when it came to that. And also they were going to divide up Poland. Okay, so when Hitler invaded, the Soviets waited until, they made sure that there was the least amount of resistance left in the Poles, and then they went ahead and invaded their part that had been agreed upon. They were going to occupy. And what did the Soviets do always when they occupy something? Well, they go after the intelligentsia, the people who are educated, and they go after the military, especially the officers. So what do they do here? They captured, I don't know, 20,000, I think 10 to 25,000 Polish officers and imprisoned them after that. This was in 39, so now we're in March of 1940. They also arrested the landowners because, they're going to have collectivization, they're going to have communism, the working man, all that kind of BS. So now the final solution for them was to be executed. That's what's going to happen here later, and we'll find out more about that. But yeah, it was just out and out murder. And on March 3rd, 1942, the most serious, costly air attack against Australia itself happened on this date. Japanese fighter pilots attacked the town of Broome in Western Australia. They killed at least 85 people. Unfortunately, they also these 88 people included Dutch evacuees from Dutch East Indies who had barely gotten out with their lives when the Japanese invaded their colonies there, and some U.S. airmen, and they were all no respite for them, no refuge in Australia, not that part of Australia anyway. So, unfortunately, that happened. One of my dreams is to get out there and see Darwin and see Broome and see those areas that did suffer direct attack from the Japanese in World War II. Luckily for the Australians, the American Navy was able to stop the Japanese before they were able to do any more damage to that wonderful country. And on March 3rd, 1943, this is one of my favorite battles of the war. It's called the Battle of Bismarck Sea. It took place, ironically enough, in the Bismarck Sea, off of New Guinea. The Japanese were sending troops in transports, a convoy. They were going to reinforce their positions and so forth. And so the Australian Air Force, the American Air Force, Army Air Force, took off to sink them. What's interesting about this battle are the tactics. So this was the first time that the Army Air Corps and the Kangaroo Air Force as well, they used the skip bombing technique. Now they didn't invent it; it had been used before, but they had been practicing it because they realized that they were missing a lot of opportunities to take out these merchant ships by trying to bomb them directly. So what did they do? So they would come in, these medium bombers like a B-26, B-25s, B-26s, and they would fly in low as if they were going to drop torpedoes. But they were flying with bombs. But the way they would do it is they would release those. So it's kind of like throwing a flat rock. If you've ever been around a lake or a river or whatever, you can just throw that flat bottom rock. It would just skip, you know, and when you see how many skips it would take before it sank into the water. Well, it's the same principle. It's going to skip and then it's going to go right into the ship and cause a lot of damage. And boy, I tell you what, it was something. And then it wasn't just that too. Remember, these bombers were armed to the teeth. The American bombers, especially, were armed to the teeth with 50 caliber machine guns. So they were ordered because the Japanese did not take prisoners, and they knew that they would have to either kill them in the water, or kill them in the jungle, which was going to be a lot more difficult, and they could take out a lot more of our troops. They were given orders to strafe them, the survivors in lifeboats in the water, and so on and so forth. That's what they did. So they knocked out about 7 to 8 transports, about 3 to 4 destroyers, and then afterwards they just went back and forth, strafing, 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 strafing. So It was brutal. I mean, the after the battle, the pilots and the air crew were talking about just how the Bay of Bismarck, the Bay of Sea of Bismarck, excuse me, was red. I can imagine the damage the sharks did to that after that as well. So on March 3rd, 1944, the British came out with a statistic, and it was very interesting that for the first time in the war, well, not the first time. I think at the beginning of the war, during the phony war, when actual shooting really hasn't started yet, there were more civilians that were killed in blackouts and car crashes in their war and the actual battles. But of course, once the real war started, that all shut up, and there was more military casualties. But now, because of all the bombings that had been going on British cities, the number of civilian casualties actually was more than the military casualties. I think it was like there was 50,324 civilian casualties up to this point, and the military had 50,103. So it just goes to show you that the Brits were it was an all-out war, and in a lot of ways there wasn't a home front because the home front was on the front lines because of the bombing, and so the RAF was able to push them back, defend the daylight bombing. Then they started night bombing, and then they were able to do better at that with night fighters and so forth, taking the fight to the Germans. The Germans withdrawing their fighters to just to defend against the RAF attack, and the Americans, of course, attacking or bombing the homeland. But you know what? Even then they came out with V1 and V2 rockets. And so they continually were bombing the UK, England mostly, throughout the entire war. So of course the civilians suffered tremendously, not just dying, but being wounded, being homeless, and so on and so forth. So they were very brave. And then finally, on March 3rd, 1945, U.S. and Filipino troops officially captured Manila, the capital of the Philippines. This was interesting because the Japanese general Yamashita had given an order for them to withdraw to the hills and North Luzon and fight and hang on as long as they could. But as often happened with the Japanese command structure, there was a fanatical admiral. He said, "Screw that. We're not going to let Manila just be taken without total destruction." So he had about 5,000 naval troops, and they embedded themselves into Manila and fought to the last man and did their best to destroy most of that very beautiful city. And they did. But on today's date, the U.S. and Filipino troops finally eliminated all their resistance, which means they killed them, or they killed themselves before they were about to be killed. And that ends today's chronicle. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you tomorrow.